The email notification popped up on my phone at 3 a.m. Your DNA results are ready. I was half asleep, scrolling mindlessly, so I clicked without thinking. What I saw made my heart stop. Under close family matches were 3 names I'd never heard before listed as my biological parents and sibling. But my parents were asleep down the hall. My brother was at college. These people were strangers, and according to the DNA database, they'd been searching for their missing daughter for 23 years. I'm Sophia, 23, and until that moment, my life had been ordinary in the best way. I grew up in a small house in Pennsylvania, daughter of David and Linda Mitchell. My dad worked as a mechanic. My mom was a school secretary. We weren't rich, but we were happy. My younger brother Tyler and I had normal childhoods, soccer games, family dinners, summer road trips in our old minivan. Nothing remarkable, nothing suspicious. I'd ordered the DNA test on a whim 3 months earlier. My roommate Jenna had done one and discovered she was part Scandinavian, which she thought was cool. I figured I'd find out I was boring European mix, maybe get some health information. The kit sat on my dresser for weeks before I finally swabbed my cheek and mailed it back. I never expected it to destroy everything I knew about my life. That morning at 3 a.m., I sat in my tiny apartment bedroom, reading and rereading the matches. Margaret and Robert Castellano. Parents. Listed as a 99.9% match. A daughter named Victoria Castellano. Full sibling. 99% match. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I clicked on Margaret Castellano's profile. She'd uploaded a photo, a woman in her 50s, elegant, dark hair like mine, eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. Her profile description said, "Searching for my daughter Elena, born March 15, 2002, taken from Mercy Hospital, Philadelphia." Elena, not Sophia. March 15, 2002. My birthday. The birthday I'd celebrated my entire life. Philadelphia. My parents told me I was born in a small hospital in Harrisburg, 2 hours away. I clicked on the message function with trembling fingers and saw she'd already sent me something. Sent it years ago. Apparently, the moment she'd uploaded her DNA, hoping for a match. The message was simple. If you're reading this, you might be my daughter Elena. You were taken from the hospital nursery when you were 2 days old. We never stopped looking for you. Please, please contact me. I just want to know you're safe. I stared at my phone screen until the words blurred. Then I got up, walked to the bathroom, and threw up. When I could breathe again, I sat on the cold tile floor and tried to think logically. This had to be a mistake. Some error in the DNA processing. My parents would never, they couldn't have. But even as I thought it, pieces started clicking into place. Small things I'd never questioned before. The fact that I had no baby photos from the hospital, only pictures starting around 6 months old. My mom's explanation that the hospital photos had been lost in a move, the way my parents never wanted to talk about the day I was born, always changed the subject when I asked for stories. The fact that I looked nothing like either of them. Dad was blonde and blue-eyed. Mom had light brown hair and hazel eyes. I had dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin. They'd always said I took after some distant relative. I'd never questioned it. I sat on that bathroom floor until sunrise, my mind racing. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done without thinking it through. I called my mom. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice groggy with sleep. She asked what was wrong, if I was okay. I asked her to tell me the truth about where I was born. There was a long silence. Then she asked what I was talking about. Her voice suddenly very awake, very careful. I told her about the DNA test, about the matches, about the message from a woman named Margaret Castellano, whose daughter was taken from a hospital in Philadelphia 23 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother started crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from being falsely accused, the kind that comes from being caught after decades of running. She asked me to come home, said she needed to explain in person that I deserved the truth, but I had to hear the whole story. I drove to my parents' house in a daze, 2 hours on the highway, my mind completely blank. When I pulled into the driveway, both my parents were waiting on the porch. My dad looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. My mom's eyes were red and swollen. We sat in the living room where I'd spent my entire childhood. and they told me the truth. My mom, Linda, I had to start thinking of her as Linda, had worked as a nurse at Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia 23 years ago. She and David had been trying to have a baby for 7 years. Multiple miscarriages, failed IVF attempts, adoption waitlists that went nowhere. She was 38 and desperate, watching women younger than her come through the maternity ward with healthy babies while she went home to an empty nursery. And then one night, she was working the night shift when a baby was born to a wealthy couple, a beautiful, healthy baby girl. Linda held her during the first night, did the routine checks, watched the new mother sleep in exhaustion. Something broke inside her that night. She couldn't explain it, couldn't justify it, but she made a decision that would destroy multiple lives. She waited until 4 in the morning when the ward was understaffed and quiet. She took the baby from the nursery, walked out through a side exit, and drove home. By the time the hospital realized the baby was missing, Linda had already quit her job via text message, and she and David were on the road. They drove for 2 days straight, ending up in a small town in Pennsylvania where nobody knew them. David had been horrified at first, wanted to take me back. But Linda convinced him it was too late, that they'd go to prison if they returned me, that I'd end up in foster care. She convinced him that we could be a family. They created new identities, not completely, just enough. Used a connection David had from his military days to get a birth certificate with their names on it. Registered me with the local hospital as if I'd been born there. Started a new life. Linda told me all of this while crying, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She said she knew it was wrong, that she'd known it every single day for 23 years. But she loved me. She'd raised me, cared for me, been my mother in every way that mattered except biology. David sat beside her, silent, his face gray. He finally spoke and said he'd gone along with it because he loved Linda, because he'd wanted a child too desperately to think clearly. But the guilt had eaten at him for decades. I sat across from them, these people who'd raised me, and felt nothing. Numbness, complete disconnection. I asked if they knew about the Castellanos. If they knew there were parents out there who'd spent 23 years searching for their stolen daughter. Linda nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. She said she'd seen the news coverage, the desperate pleas from the parents, the age-progressed photos as I got older. Every time she saw Margaret Castellano's face on the news, begging for information about her missing daughter, Linda had felt sick with guilt, but she never came forward. She told herself I was better off with them, that the Castellanos were rich and would just have other children, that I was happy and loved and that was what mattered. The Castellanos had other children, a daughter named Victoria, born 2 years after I was taken. But they'd never stopped searching for Elena, never stopped hoping. I stood up, told my parents I didn't know what else to call them, that I needed time, that I didn't know if I could forgive this, didn't know if I should, that they'd stolen me from my real family and built my entire life on a lie. Linda reached for me, begging me not to leave like this, but I walked out, drove back to my apartment. And then I did what I'd been avoiding for hours. I messaged Margaret Castellano. I told her I'd seen her message, that I believed I was her daughter, that I'd just learned the truth about my kidnapping. I said I needed time to process everything, but I wanted to meet her when I was ready. Her response came within 5 minutes. She said she'd been waiting 23 years for this message, that she'd wait however long I needed, that she just wanted to know I was alive and safe. She said she loved me, had always loved me, had never stopped being my mother, even when I was gone. I stared at those words, "I love you," from a complete stranger who was my biological mother, and I started crying for the first time since I'd opened that DNA result. The next 2 weeks were a blur of police statements and lawyers. Linda and David were arrested the day after I went to the authorities. Kidnapping, falsifying documents, identity theft. The charges were extensive. They didn't fight it, didn't try to run. They'd been expecting this moment for 23 years. My brother Tyler called me crying, saying he didn't understand how Mom and Dad could have done this, asking if I was really his sister or if that was a lie too. I had to tell him that genetically we weren't related, but that didn't change what we'd been to each other growing up. I don't think he believed me. And then came the day I'd been dreading and desperately wanting at the same time. The day I met the Castellanos. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a private room in a hotel, with a therapist present to help mediate. I walked into that room and saw them for the first time. Margaret, Robert, and Victoria. Margaret looked exactly like her photo, but older, more worn. 23 years of grief had carved lines into her face. When she saw me, she put a hand over her mouth and started crying silently. Robert was tall, distinguished, with dark hair graying at the temples. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, joy and pain and disbelief all mixed together. And Victoria, my sister, my actual biological sister, looked so much like me it was startling. Same dark hair, same eyes, same height. We could have been twins despite the 2-year age difference. Margaret asked if she could hug me. Her voice was shaking. I nodded, and she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me carefully, like I might break. She smelled like expensive perfume and something else. Something that felt weirdly familiar, even though I'd never met her before. She whispered that she'd dreamed about this moment for 23 years. That she'd known I was alive, had felt it in her bones, even when the police told her to give up hope. We sat down, and they told me their story. The night I was taken, the investigation that went nowhere, the years of following false leads and hiring private investigators, the grief that never fully healed. The way they'd set up a foundation for missing children in my name. The way they'd never moved away from Philadelphia, never changed their phone number, just in case I somehow found my way back. Robert told me he'd built a successful pharmaceutical company in the years after I was taken. That part of his motivation was having resources to continue searching for me. That every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I should have had with them, they'd set aside money in a trust fund for me, just in case. Margaret showed me a room in their house, my room, preserved exactly as they'd decorated it when they were pregnant with me. A nursery, frozen in time, waiting for a baby who never came home. Victoria, my sister, was quiet through most of the conversation. Finally, she spoke. She said she'd grown up knowing about me, seeing my baby photo on the mantle, watching our parents grieve. She said part of her had always resented me for the pain I'd caused them, even though it wasn't my fault. But now that I was here, real and alive, she didn't know how to feel. I understood that. I didn't know how to feel either. The therapist asked me what I wanted, what kind of relationship I could handle right now. I told them the truth, that I didn't know how to be their daughter. I'd had parents for 23 years. Even if those parents had stolen me, Linda and David had raised me, loved me, been there for every moment of my life. I couldn't just erase that. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that I'd been taken from Margaret and Robert, that they'd suffered unimaginable loss because of Linda's selfish desperation, that I'd had a whole other life waiting for me, a life I'd never gotten to live. Margaret said she understood, that she didn't expect me to immediately call her mom or move into their house or act like the last 23 years hadn't happened. She just wanted to know me, wanted a chance to build something, even if it took years. Even if it never looked like a traditional mother-daughter relationship. We agreed to take it slowly. Weekly phone calls at first, then occasional visits. Maybe eventually I'd stay at their house, meet their extended family, learn about the life I would have had. The wealth was overwhelming to think about. The Castellanos weren't just comfortable, they were genuinely wealthy. Multiple homes, a private foundation, the kind of resources that meant I'd never have to worry about money again. There was a trust fund with my name on it, worth over $3 million. College funds that had been sitting there for 2 decades. An inheritance that would set me up for life. But that wasn't what I struggled with most. It was the realization that I'd been raised in a completely different social class than I was born into. The Mitchells had worked hard to provide for me, but we'd been solidly middle class. I'd taken out student loans for college. I'd worked retail jobs through high school. I'd worried about money in the normal ways people do. The Castellanos lived in a world I'd only seen in movies. Their house was a mansion. Their cars were luxury brands I couldn't pronounce. They had staff, actual household staff. Victoria had gone to private schools and an Ivy League university. She traveled to 15 countries before she turned 18. That could have been my life. Would have been my life. If Linda hadn't taken me. The hardest part was figuring out how I felt about Linda and David. They were facing serious prison time, 10 to 20 years each. depending on the charges and their cooperation. Their lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that they'd raised me well, that I'd had a good childhood, that they'd given me love even if the foundation of that love was built on a crime. The prosecutor asked me what I wanted, if I thought they should serve the maximum sentence, or if I'd support leniency. I didn't know. Some days I hated them for what they'd done not just to me, but to the Castellanos. Margaret had spent 23 years in agony, not knowing if her daughter was alive or dead. Robert had built an empire partly out of desperation to have resources to find me. Victoria had grown up with a ghost sister. But other days, I remembered my childhood. Linda reading to me every night before bed, David teaching me to ride a bike, family game nights, and terrible dad jokes, and the way they'd both cried at my high school graduation. They'd loved me. That was real, even if everything else was a lie. The therapist I'd been seeing weekly said both things could be true. That Linda and David could have genuinely loved me while also committing an unforgivable crime. That I didn't have to choose between hating them and forgiving them. I could live in the complicated middle ground where most real human relationships exist. 6 months after the DNA test, Linda and David were sentenced. 8 years each, with possibility of parole after 5. The judge acknowledged that they'd provided a stable home for me, but emphasized that they'd committed a serious crime with lasting consequences. That Margaret and Robert had been robbed of their daughter's childhood. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't watch them be taken away. Couldn't face either them or the Castellanos in that moment. Tyler did attend. He called me afterward, crying, saying the parents we'd known were gone. That his whole childhood felt like a lie now. I told him what my therapist had told me, that our experiences were real even if the foundation was false. That the love we'd felt was genuine even if the circumstances weren't. He asked if I was moving in with the Castellanos, taking my real family's money, abandoning the Mitchells completely. I told him I didn't know yet, that I was trying to figure out who I was when my entire identity had been built on a lie. A year after the DNA test, I'm still figuring it out. I have dinner with the Castellanos once a week now. Margaret and I are slowly building something, not a traditional mother-daughter relationship, but something that feels meaningful. She tells me stories about what my childhood should have been like, shows me photos of birthday parties I never attended. Sometimes it makes me sad. Sometimes it makes me angry at Linda for stealing that from us. Victoria and I are developing a friendship. We're too different. She grew up with privilege and opportunity I never had, but we're trying. She's teaching me about the family business, introducing me to their world. Sometimes I feel like an imposter in designer clothes and country clubs. But sometimes I feel like I'm discovering a part of myself that was always there, just hidden. Robert set me up with a financial advisor to help me understand the trust fund and inheritance. It's overwhelming, more money than I ever imagined having. I donated a portion to organizations that help families of missing children. It seemed right, somehow, using money that existed because I was stolen to help other families avoid the same pain. I still talk to Tyler regularly. He's struggling more than I am, I think. His entire family structure imploded, and he doesn't have a backup family waiting with open arms. I make sure he knows he's still my brother, that our relationship wasn't a lie, even if its origins were. As for Linda and David, I haven't visited them in prison. I've written letters, but I haven't sent them. I don't know if I ever will. My therapist says I don't owe them forgiveness, but I also don't owe them eternal anger. That it's okay to still love them while acknowledging what they took from me. Some days, I wake up and forget for a moment. Forget that my name was supposed to be Elena. Forget that I was stolen. Forget that somewhere there's a nursery that was decorated for me 23 years ago, waiting for a baby that never came home. Other days, it's all I can think about. The 2 lives I've lived, the one I had and the one I should have had. The question of who I would have been if Linda hadn't made that choice in the hospital nursery. If I'd grown up as Elena Castellano instead of Sophia Mitchell. I'll never know the answer to that question. I can only move forward with the strange, fractured identity I have now. Part Sophia, part Elena, fully neither. A girl who was stolen but loved. A daughter who has 2 families and belongs completely to neither. The DNA test was supposed to be fun, a way to learn about my ancestry, maybe discover I had some interesting genetic markers. Instead, it revealed that my entire life was built on a crime, that I was loved by people who committed an unforgivable act, that somewhere there was a family who never stopped searching for me. I don't know if there's a happy ending to this story. The Castellanos got their daughter back, but I'm not the baby they lost. I'm a stranger who shares their DNA. Linda and David are in prison, losing years with the children they raised. Tyler lost the parents he thought he knew. Victoria gained a sister she never expected. And me? I gained a truth I never asked for, and lost the simple certainty of knowing who I am. But I'm learning to live in this complicated space, learning to build relationships with the Castellanos, while acknowledging the love Linda and David gave me, learning to be both Sophia and Elena, neither and both. If you've ever discovered that your life wasn't what you thought it was, that the people you trusted most kept devastating secrets, you're not alone. If you've ever had to rebuild your identity from the ground up, questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself, I understand. The truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just gives you a different kind of prison to navigate. But at least it's honest. At least it's real. And after 23 years of living a lie, I'll take complicated truth over comfortable fiction any day.